Hi there, I'm Allison, and I am a registered dietitian with Senior Resources, and I'd like to welcome you to our January edition of What's on the Menu. This month's topic is going to be soup and whole grains, which I have displayed behind me. You can find more information about both of these topics in my monthly newsletter that is on our website, seniorresourcesec.org. So let's talk about soup because it's winter, January. Actually, today here is a cold, dreary day. So what better type of day to eat soup than a day like today? So soup can be satisfying. It can be healthy because it's a lot of liquid. It makes us feel full. It can be a whole meal all in one, and it can be super simple and easy. So these are great things about soup. The downside is a lot of times they're soups that we would purchase in a restaurant or at the grocery store are very high in sodium. And for sodium, a lot of people need to avoid this because of buildup of fluids or arthritis or blood pressure issues. So really the whole recommendation for the population of all ages is to reduce our sodium content overall. So how can we do that and still enjoy some soup? So we're going to make a healthy soup today, which I call a flexible soup because it's the best way for you to make a healthy soup that you really like is to incorporate all the flavors that you enjoy. So we're going to make a soup, and I'm going to kind of explain some of the stuff I have displayed here as well. And I'm also going to try to offer those suggestions of how can you make this more personalized to you. So I'm going to start off with just a little drizzle of olive oil in my pan. I've already made a whole pot of soup back here, which we're going to sample in a little bit, but this is the gist of making the soup. So just a drizzle of olive oil on a medium heat. And then to that, we're going to add a little bit of diced onions. These are just about a quarter cup each in each of these containers. And then about some celery. But again, here, if you don't like onion or you don't like celery, don't put it in. And then carrots. These are like the tried and true, everybody who makes soup or stock or stuffing or anything like that always starts off with onion, celery, and carrots. But again, if you don't like them, that's okay. And you can also use a frozen diced version of any of those. So frozen diced onions are very available. You can also get frozen diced onions and pepper mix if you're going to put some pepper in it that you'd like. So that flavor profile is very easy, and you don't have to touch a knife. You can just, chop those things, just open the bag and use them frozen. And then you'd still do the same thing of just kind of sauteing them in the olive oil a little bit. So we're going to let those kind of get to where they just get a little bit see-through. And then we would add a couple other vegetables to it. Stir it around occasionally as it's getting hot. I chopped up some mushrooms. And this is a great way to use leftovers. So I had some leftover broccoli, but again, you can also just use some frozen vegetables. Frozen mixed vegetables are great. Frozen vegetables typically don't have additional sodium added to the process of freezing them, so they're always a great option for cooking or adding as a side to any meal that you're having. So now I can hear those sizzling a little bit, which is great. And that's what's going to make it a hearty meal. Now, the more that you add vegetables, you're not really adding sodium there. There's a little bit of naturally occurring sodium in some vegetables like celery or peas, but it's so minimal that it's really just going to maybe add a little bit of flavor without adding all that extra sodium. Try to avoid canned vegetables at this point if you can. I mean, we are going to use some canned beans, but if you're going to use a canned item, make sure you rinse it really well because the canning process does include some sodium in it. While those are sizzling, I want to go over a little bit of the difference between the soups. So I'm not going to name any names here, but these are traditional cream-based soups. So this is a cream of mushroom soup, and per 8-ounce serving, it has 870 milligrams of sodium. So that's about half of your whole day in 1 cup. And that's actually then, there's 2 servings in this can. So if you actually end up saying, "Ooh, that was delicious," and eat the whole can, you're going to have your whole day's worth of sodium in 1 meal, and that's kind of a challenge. So there's cream of mushroom and cream of chicken, both have the same amount of sodium in them. At 870, that's pretty high. So then what we're doing today is kind of like soup assembly. And so a lot of times we would have our go-to be like, oh, well, I'll just get some broth pre-made, or maybe you make your own broth. That's fine. The key difference here is that there's broth and there's stock. They're both made kind of the same way. You basically have some bones and you cover them with water and you boil it down, and the marrow and the bones give the flavoring into the water, and that's the liquid that you have to cook with. So stock is made so that you're going to add your own flavorings, which is what we're doing here, right? By adding those other ingredients that we're going to have to it. Broth is already seasoned so that you're not adding anything else. But what that means is that they've already put a lot of sodium in there. So this chicken broth, so compared back to that soup at 870 milligrams, this one is 860 milligrams just in the liquid. So now if you're going to add anything else to that, you're just going to be bumping up that sodium level. So that's still pretty high to have as a regular chicken broth. I'll jump over those right now and I'll go to what we call like the reduced sodium chicken broth. So you think, well, that's going to be better, right? So lower sodium means that it's a third of the amount of sodium that would, or it's a third less of the sodium that would have normally been in there. And that's about right. So this one they left at 570 milligrams of sodium per 8-ounce serving. So that's better, but it's still a third of your whole sodium intake for the day. And you haven't added any other foods into that. It's just liquid broth at this point. So then we convert over to this idea of using stock because we're going to be adding the flavorings that we like to it. And here's just a regular standard stock, store-bought right off the shelf at the grocery store. And this has 510 milligrams of sodium. So again, still about a third, but it's getting better, right? And then you have unsalted stock, also available right off the grocery store shelves. And this one has 130 milligrams of sodium. So there's some naturally occurring sodium coming from other products in the making of this, but they didn't add any extra salt. So this would be equivalent to if you made your own stock. So, you know, probably, I don't know, about, you know, every couple of weeks, I roast a whole chicken and then I boil the bones and I make my own stock. So that's the kind of stock that would be about the same level of sodium here. So same thing for you if you got a rotisserie chicken and decided to take those bones and cover them with water and boil it for about an hour, then you'd be making your own stock. And it would have some of the seasonings that were used in making the chicken, adding some of that sodium content, but it's going to be so much less than a regularly purchased commercial soup. So here's another can of soup, getting back to that idea. And the sodium is 690 milligrams of sodium. Good thing I got my reading glasses on here because, you know, these food labels are teeny tiny. But so that's still, you know, kind of on the high side. And these are all just in 1 cup servings. And then you have items that are kind of like a dry mix, and that one's 610. So they can get quite high. Okay, that's perfect. So now I'm going to add a couple other things here. I'm using a whole grain orzo because we're going to transition over to talk about whole grains in a second. This is just basically like a little teeny tiny pasta. And so they call it rice-shaped pasta or orzo. But you could use rice, a whole grain brown rice. You could use larger pieces of pasta if you like a different kind of pasta, but I'll get into that later for a whole grain. And I'm tossing it in dry right now just so it kind of picks up some of those other flavors. I'm also using a little bit of white cannellini beans. Now these were in a can and I put them in a colander and I rinsed them. I also bought a lower sodium canned version of the beans just because I want to reduce it as much as possible. But now to add flavor, I'm going to actually add some herbs and some minced garlic. And this could be any blend. I'm using an herb de Provence blend, which has some thyme and rosemary and other things in it, but you could use whatever, you know, whatever you have around would be your best bet there. So I'm going to open up my chicken stock here, my unsalted chicken stock. I shake them a little bit before we go. And I'm just going to just cover the items in here and give about an extra cup for the rice. The orzo is going to absorb some of that fluid, so I want to leave enough to it. So I put in 2 cups of stock. So I'm making a 2-cup version of soup here. I'm making a very small version here because you don't always have to make soup in a huge stock pot. So we've covered soup. My soup is cooking. I'll show you that in a second when it's done. But let's talk about whole grains as well. And you could also add meat there if you wanted to. So the whole grains that I've used are all, you know, just basically from the grocery store. I'm not saying any brand loyalty here, but orzo is that nice little pasta here. And what we want to always look at is the ingredient list. And we want that first You're probably not even going to be able to see it, but that first ingredient should say WHOLE, whole wheat, right? WHOLE. As long as it says that, that's great. You can have things that say multi-grain, which means that there's many grains, but it doesn't necessarily mean that any of them are whole. And that's what we're looking for. So WHOLE is the key term that we're looking for. So here we have whole grain brown rice, whole wheat flour, whole, the oats are always a whole oat. There's the ingredients part. Yeah, whole grain milled oats there. So you're always, and then that's also a nice thing there too. They always have this whole grain little icon on those that are a good way of looking at. And Cheerios are also a whole grain. So they always list the ingredients by weight, and you always want the first thing to be a WHOLE word, whole grain of something, if it's a grain product. There's other crackers and all other ways of incorporating more whole grains into your diet. You can have the whole grains in something like your soup. You could have your whole grains at breakfast. If you're kind of transitioning to, you still like regular pasta and you want to try to incorporate a couple of whole grains, I get one of each of the same shape and then mix them up together in a jar, and then you're having kind of half and half. And same thing with the flour. You can do half traditional white flour and half whole wheat flour and combine the two, and then they work very much the same. And there's also whole grain white flour, and that you can use that in all kinds of other ingredients. I use the whole wheat flour for a lot of dog treats that I make for my dogs too. So if you see this and you want that recipe, you can send me a message and I'll send that out to you for the dogs too. So this soup is heating up quite nicely, and I'll show you my finished version that I kind of magic of television created earlier. Earlier in the month, I also made a pumpkin soup where I used a turkey stock that I had made from a turkey, cooking down the turkey, and just added frozen butternut squash and just canned pureed pumpkin to it. And it was delish. So that's what my final soup looks like. It looks hearty and yummy and has the cooked orzo and some vegetables. I could have added more different kinds of vegetables, whatever type you like. Could serve this with a whole grain roll on the side. You could also dice up chicken if you'd like to, make it more meaty or whatever. I also keep a little fresh parsley. I grow a house plant with fresh parsley during the winter time, and I always find that to be kind of like a nice little put on top garnish, and it makes it smell kind of super fresh and delicious. So that's my segment of what's on the menu this month. And I always invite people to come, and we can watch this on YouTube later. But if you come during the live session, you can ask any question about anything nutrition, and I'll be happy to answer it. Until next time, I hope you stay well, stay healthy, and go make some soup. Take care.